Hi, my name is Katie Moody, and I will be presenting my research paper on, it's going to be titled Bringing Newspapers Online. We're going to utilize a content analysis approach to look at how traditional media outlets can implement effective digital media strategies to overcome digital disruption. So the problem is that traditional media outlets, especially rural newspapers, are struggling to meet the digital disruption. And this is illustrated in a study by Penelope Abernathy at the University of North Carolina that showed that more than a quarter of newspapers have disappeared since 2004. And then of the newspapers that are remaining, 80% are non-daily newspapers, and they're experiencing shrinking revenues from advertising. And newspapers are made up of a two-way model where they receive revenues from advertising and from subscriptions. And so now these newspapers are having to basically address the fact that their advertising is going away and they're having to rely more on subscriptions. But the introduction of digital media has disrupted the traditional operating model for newspapers because as users continue to seek out news and information online, they're going away from the traditional newspaper product. And so to gain advertising dollars related to digital media, newspapers need to show advertisers that they provide a unique product that has a more targeted audiences than other online advertising platforms. So my research paper will be based in the disruptive innovation theory, which provides that companies have a competitive advantage by finding solutions to industry disruptions, but they can also be at a disadvantage if they fall behind the technology curve, like in the case of rural newspapers. And the media industry, it underwent two waves of digitalization. The first wave was with the implementation of the internet and just providing those online digital media services for their customers. And this next wave is more associated with reaching those audiences in a digital and online format, which is where they're struggling to do that. And that's where the disruptive innovation actually comes into play. And then we're going to be looking at dynamic capabilities because Karimi and Walter proposed that by applying dynamic capabilities, companies can reallocate their resources, values, and their processes to successfully overcome disruptive innovation. So my hope is that this research will explore ways for rural newspapers to do just that. Another theory that we're going to be looking at is uses and gratifications, because this theory, specifically related to new media, it highlights why users are shifting away from traditional media and going more towards new media, such as digital media, online media, to seek out news and information. And the reason is because when media companies are looking to address disruptive innovation, it's important that they also understand the impact of uses and gratifications on why consumers are changing their habits. This will give them a more rounded idea or a more rounded solution to disruptive innovation. So some of the things that I explored in my literature review were the negative impacts of newspaper closures, which can show a decreased local news coverage in a community that recently lost a local newspaper, as well as voter polarization, and then the impact of digital media on traditional media, which it shows that as digital media was introduced, users began to rely more on digital media and less on traditional media. And then changing the business model because, as I said before, Karimi and Walter proposed that with dynamic capabilities, newspapers or industries in general can apply a resources, values, processes framework to address disruptive innovation, which is basically changing their business model. And then lastly, implementing effective digital media strategies and ways that newspapers can capitalize on hyperlocal news content to show a unique product and to gain readers and advertisers in an online digital sphere. So some of the gaps in the literature that I found were mostly around rural markets. There wasn't a lot of research related to rural newspapers. Most of the research focused on global media markets and successful global news businesses. And then there wasn't a whole lot of research about customers in rural markets and how they seek out news and information. The research question that I'll be proposing is what types of digital media are most effective for newspapers in rural West Texas media markets? The method I've chosen is content analysis because it's a qualitative research method that's capable of measuring communication effectiveness that can help media companies plan for effective communication strategies. This basically gives existing communication companies an idea of what other communication companies are doing to be successful. So this study will explore the most effective digital media strategies being utilized by rural newspapers. And the population for this research will consist of Facebook pages of rural newspapers on the South Plains with small circulations, and it will focus on the Facebook pages of those rural newspapers. And it will include the digital media posts made by these newspapers in 2021. I chose to look at posts from 1 month of each quarter because if you go throughout the year, the newspapers can be more active at different months of the year. So I wanted to be able to get, or different times of the year. So I wanted to get a good idea of the posts that were made during the entire year. And so we'll be looking at 1 month from each quarter. And so here's a table that presents the newspapers that I will be looking at and why, because it shows their circulation numbers, their distance from an urban center, which is Lubbock in these cases, and then they all print twice weekly. So I felt like that was important because they're non-daily newspapers. I'll be as far as variables, I'll be looking at the type of newspaper, followers, the media they're posting, and the engagement those posts are receiving. And then I'll have 2 coders who analyze this content over the course of a 1-month period, and they'll participate in a 2-hour training session to ensure they understand the coding process and material to minimize to maximize the reliability. This research will seek to provide answers for rural newspapers about effective digital media usage. Because in a lot of the literature, one of the biggest challenges that newspapers face is a fear of implementing digital media because it can impact their traditional media product. They're so reliant on the revenue that they receive from their traditional media product, they don't want to give any of that up to put more focus on their digital media. But if they're able to see how they can effectively utilize digital media, then they'll be more likely to put resources, processes, and values towards that type of media, and they'll have the confidence to do so. And as I said, this research could help newspapers reallocate resources and create a new business model, because once they see the success of digital media, they can use that to sell advertising for that digital and online media. And then future research could expand on media users' motivations for utilizing digital media. And research exploring the media managers' attitudes towards reallocating resources could be beneficial as well. Because as stated in literature that's relevant to this topic, the attitude of media managers in these situations is very important, because if you don't have the support of your superiors when you're going after a new realm of revenue or a new realm of content, then it's not going to be successful if it doesn't have support from the top all the way to the bottom. So anyways, that is my presentation on the content analysis I will conduct to determine effective digital media strategies for rural newspapers in West Texas. Thank you.